the School of Design at the University of Pennsylvania. He's now a doctoral student in the PhD program at the University of Pennsylvania, where he is studying the origins of distinctive Mongolian Buddhist architecture.
That is my honor to be here today to present my paper, because I'm also a Mongolian, but I have a Chinese name and I only know some simple Mongolian words. And here today I want to talk about architectures, which I named it as Yeke Juu mood. That is a kind of structure mood. I will talk about the details later. In 16th century's Mongol tomb. And yeah. Oh, yeah. No? Oh, got it. So why is the Tümed Mongols? So why is Tümed Mongols? Now, the Tümed Mongols is in the Inner Mongolian, that's from Huhao to Ordos. And as we all know, there is a lot of archaeological sites in Mongolian areas, but few of them are the timber frame architectures. So the earliest standing wooden architectures today is the Yeke Juu, which was built in 1578 by Altan. After meeting with the third Dalai Lama, Altan came back to Huhao and he converted to the Gelug site Buddhism, and he built the Yeke Juu in 1580s. 5 years later, when Altan passed away, the third Dalai Lama came to Huhao to attend ceremonies of the construction of the Altan stupa. And in the Huhao, the Abtai Han, he was given an audience to the third Dalai Lama, and Abtai Han converted to Buddhism. And when he go back to the Outer Mongolians, he built another monastery, which is the Juu. And Juu is the oldest timber frame architectures now surviving today in the independent Mongolia. And in the 2010, after the restore of the Juu, we found the inscriptions both on Chinese and Mongolian, and it shows that the Juu was built by a group of Chinese construction workers and led by a lama from the Tümed Mongols. So that's why I put the Juu also inside of the list. So here I list almost all the monasteries, all the timber frame architecture surviving today in Mongolian, both in Inner and Outer Mongolian surviving today. And I found most of them, or all of them are monasteries, and as the superpower of the Dayan Han. And so all monasteries have some connections with Altan Han, or the offspring of Dayan Han, because Altan Han is the grandson of Dayan Han. And 4 of them are in the Tümed areas, 3 of them in Huhao. 1 is the Outer Mongolian, the Juu, and 2 is in Ordos. And that is before the 1650s, when the Manchu took over the Mongolia. So I want to study about the architectures without the Manchu's influences. And before I talk about what is the Yeke Juu mood, I want to talk about what is Yeke Juu looks like. First, the Yeke Juu contains 3 parts: a Chinese-style Buddha hall with a Tibetan-style chanting hall, and 2 floors gate hall. Here, we start from the Buddha hall. From the Buddha hall, we can see that is a typical Chinese-style architecture. It has a 9 gable roof with double layers that is 7 bay wide by 7 bay deep. But if we want to apply the typical Chinese column grid system into the Yeke Juu, we found it's hard to fit, the column layout, because there should be 4 pillars in the center of the Buddha hall, and some pillars here was moved. So that is not fit to the official standard of the Ming Dynasty. And so we have to try another kind of layout, which is also called the Cao system, that consists of 3 closed circle colonies. And when we apply this kind of system in the plan, that makes the layouts reasonable, that all pillars are in the right place. So you may feel confused about this difference between the 2 systems. The diagram here shows more clearly about the difference. If we draw a line that links the pillars, we can get several squares here, and all the pillars here, they only have the connections on the squares. So the inner pillars is the tallest, and the outer pillar is the lowest. But when we come to this column grid system, which means the typical Ming Dynasty official standards, that we can find the column grid, that the pillars on the certain row, they have the certain height. And in the center, is the highest, but in the side, that is the lowest. So these two kind of systems has some difference. And when we go back to the Yeke Juu, we can find that actually the Yeke Juu, the Buddha house of Yeke Juu actually have 3 closed circle colonnades. And the green one, that's the highest, that is the inner space, and the blue one is the outer pillars, and that is the lowest. And so I named such kind of structure mode as Yeke Juu mode because they use special column layouts with a typical Tailiang timber frame layer, and they combine these two systems together. And also the Erdung Juu is also applied to such kind of structures. And when we come back to the Tibetan style chanting hall, we found that it's a Tibetan architecture because the facade has Tibetan decorations. But if we draw an X-ray diagram, we can find that it's actually a Tailiang system because the beams here was elevated. As if you know Chinese, you can know Tailiang means elevate the beams. But what a typical Tibetan structure looks like, here is an example. That is a diagram from the Situ Juu that is not far from Yeke Juu. And the Buddha house was built in the early 18th centuries, and we can find that although it has several layers of beams, but the beams on the certain layers, they have the certain height. So the floor, or I mean the roof on the top of the beams, they are flat. But we cannot tell the difference from the facade. That is the facade of the Situ Juu, and this is the facade of the Yeke Juu. So we cannot say the structure just by seeing the out appearance. And if we see in the section that is more obvious, we can say the height of the pillars in Yeke Juu, they have the different height. And all the pillars touch to the beams as well as the roof. But in this case, in Situ Juu, that all the pillars have the same height, and none of them touch the roof. And the floor here is flat, although it has a Chinese-style slope floor. But this part, the triangle part, is just an independent part and has nothing to do, with the body part. And this is a photo of the slope roof on the top of the chanting hall. I mean, this area. So we can draw a conclusion that the Yeke Juu was actually made of 2 parts. One is the Chinese Buddha hall, and another is a chanting hall. Although it looks like a Tibetan style architecture, but it's actually used the same structure with the Buddha hall. And in my papers, I tell about the details that the Buddha hall and the chanting hall actually did not made in the same times. The chanting hall might be built maybe 10 years later than the Buddha hall, but I do not have time to explain about the details. And then we can come to a conclusion is that maybe the original form of the Yeke Juu is like Erdung Juu. It's just like a Chinese-style Buddha hall. And when they need more chanting space, so they built a Tibetan-style chanting hall in the front. And here we can find some similarities about Erdung Juu and Yeke Juu, because many Mongolian and Japanese scholars, they believe that Erdung Juu might come from Mongol empires, or it may from 8th century's Uyghurs monasteries. But to me, if we examine the structure, we found that most of the structure and the craft, they use the same ways to build the Erdung Juu as well as the Yeke Juu. So to me, the Erdung Juu also applies the Yeke Juu mode. And here, we can find the detail about the architectural components. For example, the brick size that is really close to the craft of the Mongolian south neighbor, the Shanxi province. This is a monastery in northern part of Shanxi in Datong. We can see not only the proportion, but also the craft of the brick size, they are close. And also the decorations here is like the residential house in Shanxi. So that is why I want to find what's the original source of the Yeke Juu mood. Is there a prototype in Shanxi province? I found almost all surviving architectures in 14th and 15th centuries, but none of them fit to the Yeke Juu, which is now the modern Huhao here. Until I found a monastery near the border of the Amdo. That is the Miaoyin Monastery, which was also built by a branch of Mongols, but they show loyalty to the Ming Emperor after the collapse of the Mongol Empire. And what I want to mention is that the Altanhan and the Tümed powers once reached to the north part of the Amdo, and the first monastery built by Altanhan was actually the Chapchasum, that near the Qinghai Lake, the Qinghai Hu. So is that possible that when the Altanhan built Yeke Juu, they used the experience of, from the Chapchasum, and they used the details and the craft from the Shanxi province to form the Yeke Juu mood. So, and there are some photos about the Miaoyin monasteries, and from the section we can see the pillars here, they have a different height, and all of them touch the roof, and that's exactly match about the Yeke Juu. So let me complete my assumptions. For example, maybe suppose I'm the construction worker, and I'm the designer from north part of Amdo, and Altanhan asked me to build a monastery in Huhao. So I just use the experience of the Chapchasums and built a design style of three circle inclinates structures, but I do not know the details about the brick size or the tiles. So Altanhan found some other people to help me. For example, Amklen, maybe he is from Shanxi, so he knows how to build the brick size from Shanxi, from the local craft. So I take responsibility for the structure, and he takes responsibility for the details. That is how architectures that has the structure from Amdo and the details from the Shanxi. And when the third Dalai Lama come to Huhao, and Altanhan asked me to enlarge the chanting space, and he brings some photos or actually pictures about the Tibetan monasteries, because I never been to Tibet and I do not know the Tibetan structures. So what should I do? I just copy the structure of the Buddha hall to the chanting hall. And based on the pictures, I made some facade of the Tibetan style decorations, and it makes it looks like a Tibetan style chanting hall, but it's actually that is not pure Chinese structure, but it's more like a Chinese structure rather than a Tibetan structure. And as we said, after the Manchu took over the whole China and the Mongolia, the route from Lhasa to Beijing was opened. So there's a lot of Tibetan workers as well as Chinese workers come to Huhao and Inner Mongolians. So in the 17th and 18th centuries, we have a lot of monasteries with the pure Tibetan styles or the pure Chinese styles. But the Altanhan and his families lost power in Tümed areas, so such kind of Yeke Juu mood was totally abandoned after the 17th centuries. And although we cannot tell the difference from the appearance or from the facade, but if we analyze the structures or the details, we found actually that contains a special craft in Tümed Mongols around 16th centuries, and now it is totally disappeared. There is no need. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Do we have any? I can speak loud enough. We have lots of questions, I'm sure. Question here. Bartolo.
How long does it last? Was there any kind of conflict over the people who are using this capital power? What was the minimum requirement for these people?
So I did not hear that.
How was knowledge? How did the we have different modes. How do architects pass the knowledge from, say, Amdo to Yeke Juu to Erdenzo? How did that knowledge pass? That was your question.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Here's an example from I just mentioned about the inspirations on Yeke Juu. On Erdenzo. We found that both has Chinese and Mongolian that mentioned 木匠头长进中, and in the Mongolian it has the Chang Dalahan. That means that actually the construction workers was come from China, and they just bring the people who have such kind of knowledge or background to the certain areas, and they build the architecture there.
But I think you also mentioned in the later part from Amdo, from Yeke Juu, originally Altan Khan maybe had a kind of a drawing, and then but he couldn't actually build the drawing himself, so he brought in Shanxi artisans who had their own styles and told them, here's what I want, my basic structure. You build it like that model, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little like a homeowner says, I want to have the bathroom over here, and I want to have a basement here, and I want to have this there, and I want it to be, a brick buildings. But then you bring in the local craftsmen, and they give you a different style. They build it according to the DC version of what you just told them, as opposed to maybe the San Francisco version. Other questions? Yes, Kristen.
So you talked about how you can look at the structure of the architecture and see how there are different craftsmen coming from different places, reinterpreting the design and building it according to their techniques that they know. But the details you mentioned, particularly I'm interested in the Tibetan style where they're copying from pictures. Is there anything when you look at those very fine level details where you can see that people are copying a picture and not doing it perfectly, where there's some sort of giveaway that those are not Tibetan artisans, but in fact people looking at pictures and copying perhaps imperfectly?
Because the decorations and the facades is easy to be copy, but the structures, unless you know about the whole knowledge of how to build an architecture, it's hard to copy just by seeing a pictures or you visit this architecture, visit this building. So you have to have the knowledge, or you have to learn from your master. So it's not easy to be copied. But on the other hand, I have such experience to copy some Western styles in the Chinese architecture designs that we just copy the facade, and it's easy to eliminate it. So that's just a reasonable explanation. But I do not know whether the craftsman at that time really see the pictures. But what we are sure is that this kind of structure is definitely not a Tibetan style structure.
Are there any other questions? Well, then, if there are no further questions, I think we can all give to show our appreciation for a very interesting book.